VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. This is January 18th. This is my first correspondence with the world since the premature exit from the postseason. I recorded a show yesterday, but my video platform was completely goofy. The words didn't sync with the video. The video was behind, and I was already depressed. I wasn't going to re-record it. But nevertheless, Josh Frey, you get a first crack on the show to dissect the offseason. We'll do a little decompression of Giants, Vikings, and then get into your forte, the draft and such. That's a long lead up to ask, how are you?
Better than I was on Sunday. I'll just put it that way.
What is just a steady march up and down the field by the Giants, and it's so comical because Ed Donatel said Thursday or Friday, I think you're going to be happy with what you see. Got us all excited. There was new wrinkles and like a postseason defense that they had been putting on the shelf, and it was the opposite. So give me
It was
some
worse.
brief
Yeah.
brief thoughts on Giants Vikings because let's not wallow in our misery for too long.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, start with Kirk Cousins was great once again for most of the day, but I think that's going to be overlooked by the 4th and 8 pass that he made to TJ Hawkinson, wherever you stand on that. But yeah, that defense was just not good. I wonder if maybe Brian Asamoah would have made a difference if he had been able to get into that game more than he was because of the concussion that he suffered. It seemed like Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks were just getting beat on crossing routes all day long, and they just did absolutely nothing to adjust to it. But yeah, Giants played really well. Vikings played a little less well, and yeah, this is where we end up.
I think the problem for the off-ball linebackers, who I do not think will be employed by the Vikings in September, is they're both 30, and usually you can
Yep.
get away with one slower linebacker as long as you have Asamoah, or somebody who's good and fast. But when you do two in the modern NFL, and these guys are noticeably taking a speed decline, it spells problems. And I know we'll do hundreds of autopsies on this roster in the coming months, but ESPN published an article, I think Monday, that did every team big prediction, blah, 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 roadmap for the offseason. And that was their big prediction, is that both Kendricks and Hicks are gone because both have relatively small dead cap penalties. And I think with Kendricks especially, it's like the first no-brainer. He's scheduled to make 11 something million. By cutting him, you'd earn back 10 million and only have a dead cap of 1 point something. So, all the Kendricks fans, these newfound Hicks fans, it's probably going to be a new linebacking core for the future. So we know the Vikings lost. The Giants will go put up their best shot against the mighty Eagles on Sunday. But let's get into offseason stuff because there's no sense to prittle prattle about losing in the playoffs. It happened. I think we were wrong. Indeed, the Vikings turned out to be semi-fraudulent, if not all the way. All of the advanced stats were right. Go figure. But here's the deal. There is a Kirk Cousins is under contract for one more season. They always add an extra year on to, they don't want the guy playing on his final year of his deal. The new fold in the Kirk Cousins annual chat is that he'll be 35 years old, and 35-year-old quarterbacks usually don't get better. They either sustain like Mr. Brady or Rodgers. I guess Rodgers got better, but that's kind of a strange example, or they regress like Breeze did, Roethlisberger in recent memory. So no, I know that you're a Cousins supporter, so to speak. You realize he's anywhere from the 10th to 15th best quarterback in most seasons. Does his age play any factor in what you want the Vikings to do with him this offseason, if anything?
This offseason particularly, not so much, I don't think, just because I think 34 to 35 doesn't make that much of a difference in my mind, at least. Especially you're going to keep Kevin O'Connell around, obviously. You're going to have pretty much the exact same weapons that he's throwing to. Maybe revamp that a little bit with Thielen, Galvin Cook, maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to have Justin Jefferson. You're going to have TJ Hawkinson. Those were his main guys down the stretch of the year, and they played very well. So I don't have too much of an issue with him going to 35. Extending him, I don't know if I'd necessarily do that. Maybe 1 year at max, just because I do think at some point we're going to have to look at that quarterback position and say it's expensive. It's part of the reason why we aren't able to field particularly great defenses, because we just can't go out and get the premier guys in free agency, kind of like what happened last year.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that Cousins is going to be, I think 2023 Cousins, run it back. I think he played very well in 2022, one of his better years, despite some statistical drops. But I mean, I don't have any problem with bringing him back in 2023.
What about the sentiment that this has been 5 years of this, and it's been two playoff appearances, haven't got out of the divisional round, only sniffed it once. Do you have any fear that we'll be chilling here a year from today going, oh, been 10-7, 10-7, lost in the division or the first round of the playoffs? Do you have any fear that we have a large enough sample size on Cousins that it's time to turn the page?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Mhm.
2023, I don't expect them to compete for a Super Bowl. Like,
Okay.
I don't think there's any reason for us to expect that out of them from what we've seen this season down the stretch. The defense, maybe if you improve the defense, that can happen, but there's going to have to be a lot of changes all over that field for that to change enough for them to be one of the top contenders in the Super Bowl contendership. I think, like you said, advanced analytics got it right. We got it wrong for the most part, thinking that they had a chance. I don't think that they would have beaten San Fran either way. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of better, I guess, that we got it out of the way now. We can start talking about it. But yeah, I don't think that there's any reason for us to think that they're going to be that much different in 2023 in terms of there's being able to compete for a Super Bowl. But I just, like we've talked about it, I don't trust any option at the quarterback position to swap out immediately.
Okay.
So I don't really see a way to get rid of him. One, and I don't see anybody better.
Okay. I think it was the Buffalo game that really did it for especially men and women like me who do enjoy advanced stats. Those painted a
Yeah.
picture of mediocrity in the league in terms of offense and defense. Like they were overachieving. But when you go in and you beat Buffalo on the road, it's like, all right, am I the one who's a doofus for not believing in them? And I think that's what happened to most of us. What about since this could be the final year of Cousins' contract if they don't extend it? What about throwing a dartboard for a rookie quarterback in this draft to begin the nurturing process? Does that whet your appetite at all?
I don't know if I like round one. I definitely wouldn't do it. Maybe if Kevin O'Connell finds somebody day three, day two, I think that why not take a flyer on somebody. I wrote in my mock draft over on Purple PTSD on Monday. I had them taking Clayton Tune out of Houston in day three in round five because I think he's basically a Kirk Cousins type passer in the pocket, but he's also pretty mobile as well. He's put up some pretty big numbers over at Houston over the past few years. So I think that he'd be a guy to watch out for them to take a shot on. And I think that we're kind of underestimating the potential that Nick Mullins could be a bridge QB
Mm-hmm.
following 2023 as well, especially depending on if he gets like a 2 year deal, maybe 2 years, 10 million, something like that, just to be back up this year and then maybe step into that role a little bit in 2024. I think that's a possibility as well. So those are two things that I'd keep an eye on moving forward. 2024 though, go all in, get a quarterback. That's what I would do.
Yeah, because you've maintained on this show and in your writings that that draft class, at least right now, looks pretty sexy, right, for quarterbacks.
Yeah, Caleb
Okay.
Williams, Quinn Ewers, those type of guys. I think those are going to be legit quarterbacks in the NFL. I think.
Okay. Between now and March 15th, which is the formal start of free agency, I can't remember when the legal tampering and all that begins. Maybe it is the 15th. Which high-priced veterans depart the Minnesota Vikings?
Um, well, I do think that there's a chance that Adam Thielen's gone. I
Okay.
think that his cap number is going to be you can save a decent bit of money by getting rid of him, and then I keep an eye out for Zadarius Smith too because they can save a ton of money by getting rid of that contract. I think it's like 12 million or something that I can save against the cap. And he wasn't very good down the stretch of the year. Obviously, he had that knee injury that was bugging him. So maybe he can bounce back in 2023. But in terms of just being able to save money, those are two guys that I'd look out for as potential cut candidates. And honestly, there are a ton of guys all over the field that you could look at too, like even Eric Kendricks, Harrison Smith. All you talked about the off-ball linebackers, they're probably going to have two different starters there. So there's guys all over the place that they can get rid of and raise that cap number for them to go out and get some free agents.
What about Dalvin Cook?
Dalvin, I think you got to run it back with Dalvin.
Okay.
I think yeah, I don't know. I'd have to see a little bit more out of Ty Chandler to feel comfortable with them getting rid of both him and you're gonna have to keep in mind that they're probably going to lose Alexander Madison in free agency too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's either they're super confident in Chandler and Nwangwu, or they have a guy in the draft that they've got an eye on in later rounds that they think they can go out and get too. Because I don't know if I trust any guys right now to be the lead workhorses in that backfield, especially with how young the offensive line is, particularly at the interior. You got Ed Ingram, then maybe Garrett Bradbury's gone. You have to replace the center. So there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty in terms of the run blocking for this offensive line. So I think keeping Cook might be the better option. But if they've got a guy in the draft, go get him.
Yeah, I think that there's gonna like it'll like who how can I say this? It'll you remember how last year everybody wanted not everybody, some people wanted a rebuild. And I think
Yeah.
this year you're going to see an exodus of Kendricks, Thielen, possibly Cook. You said the Zadarius here, Patrick Peterson, perhaps Harrison Smith, perhaps. So based on the name recognition of players that Vikings fans know and love, I think by the way that these guys either take pay cuts or fly out the door, it's gonna feel like a rebuild when in reality it's just getting rid of bloated contracts and trying to get younger and faster. So I think it'll be sold to us by some folks as a rebuild, but in Kwesi Adofo-Mensa's mindset and lingo, it's the competitive rebuild. All right, the next thing I want to ask you is TJ Hawkinson was brought aboard to the Vikings for a second round pick, and the Vikings also, I believe, got a fourth rounder. Do you think that when Kwesi Adofo-Mensa pulled the trigger on that trade, he knew damn well that he would take whatever low first round draft pick he got, traded a little bit back for like the 29th or 30th and a second rounder? Is that seemingly guaranteed to happen, or is that just my stupid theory?
I don't know if it's necessarily guaranteed, just because there are a lot, especially on the defensive side, there are a lot of really good players in this draft class. You look at the edge, the cornerback position; those two are super deep. Like at cornerback, you're not going to see a ton of stars like Sauce Gardner who come in and be the best cornerback in the entire league right away. But I do think that at edge, there's multiple guys that can start right away. Cornerback, you could probably even go into the second round and find starters right away. So yeah, I do think that it's definitely a possibility that they trade down, but I also wouldn't be shocked if they just stay there and pick a guy that they really like.
I think the reason that I'm sold, at least my theory, that this is what happened is because that's why he pulled the trigger on Hawkinson, knowing like, oh, I'll get my second rounder back, easy peasy. And you'll recall last year, I think it was either in their little documentary or something, they talked about finding value in the second round. Like that's like it was like the number 20 through 50 guys or something that they claimed like this is where we make our money. This is where our breadbasket is. So I'm thinking that wasn't limited to a single draft. I think that was philosophically. So if I mean, of course I'll do mock drafts and everything, but I'm just going to assume that they're going to trade with the 29th or 30th pick and get somebody second rounder. But because of your draft prowess, let's pretend that they stay at 23, which is where Christian Darrisaw was picked 2 years ago. Tell us now that we know they lost in the first round, you don't think they're going to compete next year for a Super Bowl or at least be a real Chiefs like contender or Bills like contender. You know the roster needs, with a little caveat that free agency will provide either more holes or more additions. Who would be your guy right now with the 23rd pick for this roster and depth chart?
23 right now. I've got a couple guys in mind. We talk about Trenton Simpson all the time on this show whenever I'm on. I love that guy out of Clemson. I really do think that he can be an Eric Kendricks type of player in the NFL where he can just do absolutely everything at the off-ball linebacker spot. And looking at how the off-ball linebackers played against the Giants, I don't see how you can look at that position and say it's not a need right now. So I think that's probably the number one that I'd go after. If he goes off the board earlier than that, I wouldn't be opposed to an edge rusher, especially if they are going to part ways with Zadarius Smith. Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame comes to mind. He's a bigger guy. He's super explosive off the line of scrimmage too. Piled up some sacks at Notre Dame. So yeah, those are probably the two positions that I'd go for. And probably if I had to pick a guy right now, those would be the guys that I eyeing where they're at in the draft. So
What in some mock drafts, and it's probably early to consider mock draft simulators or even your mock draft realistic because so much draft type is going to change between now and April 27th. But what about if the wide receiver from LSU, Jefferson's former teammate, what if he falls to the Vikings? Would they snatch him up?
I'd be shocked if he went in the first round. If I'm
Oh,
being honest,
really?
Kayshon Boutte, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that he'd be available in the second, just
Okay.
because it was a bit of a drop off for him this past year. Just he had a lot of things going on off the field, I think, and then
Okay.
there was also he wasn't nearly as good as he was in 2021.
Okay.
And I think part of that might have had to do with the quarterback. Part of that might have had to do with the scheme. Part of that might have just been he's the only wide receiver on that team right now. So I think that he's going to probably be available on day two. But that's another spot that later on in the draft, I think that they're going to have to find somebody that can be a deep threat. And Boutte out of LSU, he's a guy that super athletic. He can run pretty much every single route. Like
Okay.
if if the Vikings were to go get him, there's a pretty decent chance that he turns into an Adam Thielen type in the NFL. So I'd keep an eye on that as well.
Okay. Just not at 23, at least now before the combine and all that shit. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't think I'd go after it right now at 23 just because I think you can get him later on. But if he does blow it away at the combine, there's a chance that it's kind of like
Okay.
Derek Stingley last year. He can rise back up through the ranks again.
Okay. And then for Vikings fans, if indeed they get back in the second round, right now they got nada in the second round. Just remember, second round is an absolute treasure trove for wide receivers in recent years. That's, I mean, arguably better ones come out of the second round than the first round. All right, I'm putting you on the spot here. By the time most folks watch this episode of VikesNow, the 1 p.m. press conference from Kwesi Adoffa-Mintz and Kevin O'Connell will be in the books. Give us one interesting thing that will trickle out of that. Let's see if you're right in a few hours later.
Um, well, I kind of think that Ed Donatel is still going to be the defensive coordinator in 2023.
Okay.
I think it's easier to find players to fit a scheme than it is to change schemes entirely in back-to-back off seasons.
Okay.
I Part of me hopes I'm wrong, but I do think that he's gonna stick around one more year at least. But we'll
Okay.
see if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So here's where I'm at, and then we'll wrap up the show on Donatel or the defense on the whole. Is I do agree that there is the sentiment that if Donatel was given this clay that's slow and not what he usually needs to stop mobile quarterbacks or to, stop the Giants in general, then yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. If he's been telling Kevin O'Connell for months, like, I need faster guys, why are you giving me that? Then yeah, then he has a leg to stand on and say, I told you so. However, my big fear is that in September, we keep Donatel, we get Asamoah, that fast linebacker you're talking about, Duke Shelley starts, we get a new edge, all that great stuff, all 26-year-old dudes. If we're like 4 games into the regular season and I look up and we rank 30th in yards allowed, I'm going to be like, of course, we have this guy. That's my big fear. Is I feel like it's a safer bet to say, all right, we're getting new players and we're going to get a new defensive coordinator, like the next young big thing, or somebody not named Ed Dontel. It feels like a safer bet to know that you're going to have a new everything because this emphatically didn't work. That's my only thing there. I mean, I'll be more than willing to give Donatel another shake with younger, faster players, but I also am paranoid that, middle of the season and be like, oh, great, DVOA ranks 28th in defense. We didn't change the coach. This makes sense. So that's kind of how I think about life in general. Is what am I going to think 2 months down the road? But we shall see on Donatel. And then, yeah, I think the surprising nugget here is that barring a lot of free agency movement or killing the draft, you really don't think the Vikings will be a Super Bowl contender. You think they'll potentially win the NFC North, but because you were enthusiastic about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, I think that I think the NFC North is going to be a lot better in
Mm-hmm.
2023 than it was in 2022. You got the Lions. I think Green Bay, if they keep Aaron Rodgers around, they're going to bounce back a little bit at least. They're not going to be as bad as they were in the middle portion of the season. And
Mm-hmm.
then even Chicago, Justin Fields, they've got all the cap space in the entire league. I think they've got twice as much as any other team in the NFL right
Mm-hmm.
now,
So weird.
and they've got the number one overall pick. So they can do absolutely everything they want with that roster. So I do think that the division is going to be more competitive. I don't think
And a first place
13 wins is
schedule.
and a first place schedule, right? You got to
Just
go.
brutal news.
I don't think that 13 wins is going to be even in play. So you're looking at probably the same situation where you're the 3, maybe even the 4 seed, and then you're going on the road to probably again either San Francisco or Philadelphia. And are you going to be able to beat them even with a better defense? I don't know. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I completely agree. I said on my episode that I recorded that won't see the light of the day because of technical difficulties, I talked about how we had this rare window where the Lions started off 1-6 and therefore canceled their realistic chances of the postseason. The Bears pretty much announced that we're going to be shitty, and they were. And then the Packers had a uncharacteristic bad year, and here was this, knight in shining armor Vikings at 13-4. And what did they do? They lost in the first round, and you still get a first place schedule. It's nightmarish, but we'll have all offseason. Thankfully, I think the Brain Trust and Kwesi Adofements and Kevin O'Connell are equipped for this, and they know this more so than we do. So I think they'll be ready. All right, Josh, we'll be back next Wednesday. Ooh, by that time, we'll have a conference championship weekend coming up, and we'll probably know a little bit more about the Vikings offseason, especially Ed Donatell's employment or not. Any closing arguments, sir?
It's going to be a fun couple months. Let's just get ready for it.
No. All right, we'll talk to you in 1 week. Skol, baby.